Well, hello everyone. Good to see you today. I've got my Bible open to Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9. This is the daily Bible reading for February the 4th, Thursday, February the 4th. And we have a reading from all three of the synoptics today, but the longest reading comes from Matthew, which starts at the end of chapter 9 and goes on through chapter 10. And so we're going to pull some things out from that text today. We're not going to be reading this whole section, but we are going to hit a few points here and there. And this is what is often referred to as the limited commission. We'll talk about why that is in just a moment. But this is set in somewhat of a contrast to the Great Commission, which is given at the end of the gospel narratives. But this commission is smaller in scope, and hence the name limited commission. But let's start in Matthew chapter 9, and let's read together beginning at verse 35. Jesus was going through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. Seeing the people, he felt compassion for them, because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest." Now, Jesus here says to his disciples that there are many people out there who are broken, people who are hurting, people who, as Jesus said in the Beatitudes, are spiritually bankrupt. You remember that Beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit. There are people who have spiritual needs, and Jesus can help them. Jesus wants to help them. But he says to the disciples, you need to be praying that God would send out workers into the world to help these people and to show them the path to truth and right and peace and blessing and so forth. But what's interesting about this is that Jesus doesn't just say, we need to pray about this and then stop there. Because as we come into chapter 10, it says Jesus summoned his 12 disciples, and he's going to send them out into the harvest. He follows up his prayer with action. And he says, we need to get out and get busy. We need to get out there and we need to share the gospel with people. And so as we, as members of the Taylor's Church, we think about our theme for this year, which is We Preach Christ. And we're going to be talking all year long about Jesus and about who he is and what the Bible says about him and what he offers to the world. But we're going to be talking a lot about preaching him and getting this great message out. And so we need to be like the disciples. We need to be ready to answer the call of Jesus to go out into the harvest and help bring people in. So Jesus summons the 12. I'm chapter 10 and verse 1 now. He gives them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. So Jesus gives the disciples the authority to do what it says he was doing in verse 35. He's going to send them out to preach and to heal. Now in verses 2 through 4, we're given the names of the 12 apostles. You're familiar with those, but notice what Jesus says in verse 5. These 12 Jesus sent out after instructing them, do not go in the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter any city of the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. This is why this text is given the name the limited commission. Don't go to the Gentiles, don't go to the Samaritans, just go to the house of Israel. Just go to the Jews. Now, what are Jesus' reasons for doing that? Why does he give this order as opposed to saying make it far wider in scope? Don't really want to get into all of that. I'm not sure we know all of the reasons that Jesus has for this, but this is what he tells them to do. And the rest of chapter 10 is the instructions that Jesus gives to help them on their way. To help them on their mission, he gives them these instructions. And so he says, verse 7, here's what you are to preach. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's exactly what Jesus has been preaching. Back in chapter 9 and in verse 35, He's proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. Matthew chapter 4 mentions the same thing right around verse 23 or so. He's preaching the gospel of the kingdom. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's what John the Baptist preached. That's what Jesus preached. And Jesus says that's what the apostles need to be preaching as well. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. That's verse 8. Now, Jesus here is going to give them a number of different instructions. And some of them have to do with their personal safety. Some of them have to do with provisions that are made for them, how they're going to be provided for on this journey and on this mission. For instance, he says in verse 9, do not acquire gold or silver or copper for your money belts, or a bag for your journey, or even 2 coats or sandals or a staff. For the worker is worthy of his support. And whatever city or village you enter, inquire who is worthy in it, and stay at his house until you leave that city. You're going to be relying upon the benevolence and the generosity of others as you go on this mission. And sure enough, he says, there will be some places you go that will not be generous towards you. They will not welcome you. Some people will. And you thank them, you be kind to them, you treat them well because they have treated you well. So some of these instructions deal with their simple provisions and how they should be provided for on this mission. But then there are other instructions, as I said, that help them understand that this is not going to be a bed of roses for you. That there will be some people who do not like you. They do not want you to be in their city. So in verse 14, whoever does not receive you, nor heed your words, as you go out of that house or that city, shake the dust off your feet. Truly I say to you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Now, that is certainly an exaggerative statement, a hyperbolic statement. Sodom and Gomorrah were cities that were destroyed completely by God for their wickedness. And you can read about that in Genesis chapters 18 and 19. And Jesus says, if there are people who do not receive you, then Sodom and Gomorrah will receive more mercy in the day of judgment than they will. Now, that is a statement that is intended to shock and intended to make people sit up and pay attention. But Jesus says that there are going to be some who do not receive you. They do not welcome you. They do not want you. Verse 16, I think, is important. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. In that one little verse, there are 4 animals that Jesus mentions. He says, you are sheep. I am sending you out as sheep, but I am sending you out among wolves. You are not wolves going out among sheep. It's the opposite. You are sheep going out among wolves. People will mistreat you. People will hate you. They will try to harm you. They will try to take advantage of you. But you are sheep. You are to be gentle and kind. And, when we think about sheep, we don't think about these menacing creatures that pose any danger, right? And that's the point. Jesus doesn't want the apostles to be people who are seen as a danger or a threat. They are going out to be these calm and kind people as they interact with others. Be shrewd as serpents. Be wise as serpents. And then he says, finally, be as innocent as doves. So he's telling them about the character which they should possess as they go out on this mission. Now in verses 17 through 20, he says that there are going to be people who persecute you, and they will put you in prison, and they will try to harm you because they don't like the things that you are preaching. He says in verse 23, when they persecute you in one city, flee to the next. These are the kinds of things that you should expect. Not everybody's going to welcome you or your message. And when you're being persecuted or you're facing the threat of persecution, run away, flee, go to the next city and hope that you have better results there. A disciple, verse 24, is not above his teacher, nor a slave above his master. This is what's going to happen to me, and so it will happen to you as well. They're going to mistreat me. They already have, and they're going to do it again. And so if this is what I've experienced, you're going to experience the same kind of thing. Look at verse 28. Again, in that same context of people who would try to harm the disciples and persecute them, he says, "Do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." There are things that are worse than death. And I know that that's kind of maybe a jolting thing to say, but the Bible confirms it. Death is seen as a terrible thing, and it is a terrible thing. We hate to lose those whom we care about, those whom we love. We don't want death to take them away from us. We don't want to face death ourselves. But there are things worse than death. Don't fear those who can kill your body, Jesus says, but they cannot harm your soul. If someone takes my life as I'm going out and preaching, and remember, this is what the apostles were facing. He's talking to them in this context about their preaching and the persecution they may face. Don't be afraid of those who threaten to kill your body. But you should fear the one who is able to destroy both your body and your soul in hell. That is, you should be afraid of God. You should fear God. Don't fear men. There are things worse than death. If a person dies, but he is right with the Lord, then his eternal destination is secure. But God is the judge of all. And when one dies and his soul is not right with the Lord, then his eternal destination is secured as well. Therefore, verse 32, everyone who confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny him before my Father who is in heaven. So as we go out into the world like the apostles and we are preaching Jesus, the apostles faced all kinds of persecutions. Sometimes it was just verbal. Sometimes it was physical, and they faced serious threat of violence. You and I may face verbal persecutions, ridicule and mocking, but who knows, we may experience something more significant than that as well. We may experience physical persecution as well someday. But don't be afraid, Jesus says. And if we do have fear, if we are afraid and we are timid and hesitant to share the message of Christ with people who need it, Jesus says, if we don't confess him before men, he will not confess us before God. This is a very serious thing to think about, a very serious warning. There have been times in my life when I've been afraid to speak for the Lord. And maybe it may not have been because of fear of physical violence, but it might have been out of fear of losing a relationship, of hurting a friendship. But that fear prevented me from saying what needed to be said. I don't want to do that again. I don't want to be afraid of confessing Jesus to the world because I don't want Jesus to fail to confess me before his Father. I know that's a challenge to think about, but it is something that we should think about as we preach Christ to the world in 2021. I know there's more in Matthew chapter 10, but that's what I'm going to leave you with today. Thanks for reading along with me. God bless you.